Hello, and welcome to today's Idaho Falls Rotary Club program. My name is Liza Leonard, and I am president of the Idaho Falls Rotary Club. Thank you for joining us. We are a club of, let's start over. Rotary Club is an international service organization with approximately 1.2 million members worldwide. Our motto is service above self. We are the Idaho Falls Rotary Club, and we are currently seeking new members. We will cover just a little bit of club business this week. For news and updates, please remember to check your email or go to ifrotary.org, where we post all of our programs and activities. Our upcoming blood drive is scheduled for Thursday, March 11th. We're asking people to go and sign up for appointments available between 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. to join us at the waterfront at Snake River Landing for the blood drive with the American Red Cross. Our club service continues in the community with donated meals to the soup kitchen. Our board voted yesterday to continue those meal donations through March and April. So thank you for your contributions to that cause and the difference that we're able to make in our community right now. Next week, I wanted to remind you that our club meeting will be a Zoom meeting. So please gather with us at noon next Wednesday on Zoom, where we will be joined by special guest Ben Nelson, the District 54 Governor for 2020 and 2021. That concludes our club business for today. Our program chair for the month of February is Brad Cramer. He is also today's speaker. I'm very excited to hear today's program. It's a great topic, a good title of Imagine If, a plan to move Idaho Falls forward together. Just got a lot brighter. Before I turn it over to Brad, I'd love to tell you a little bit more about him. Brad has worked for the city of Idaho Falls for 15 years, spending the last 7 as the Director of Community Development Services. He also grew up in Idaho Falls and is proud to now be serving in his hometown. He holds degrees from BYU Idaho and ISU, including a Master of Public Administration degree. He is also a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. Brad is married with 4 children, and he says his 3 addictions are travel, books, and the LA Dodgers. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Brad Cramer.
Thank you very much, Liza. It's really good to be with you and to welcome all of you who are attending this afternoon. I'm really excited to be able to present this topic to you. As Liza mentioned, it is very timely, we hope, and I really honestly wasn't planning on being a speaker when I volunteered to be a program chair, but the timing worked out that we just happened to be launching this project at the right time. So I'm excited to be able to introduce it to you. You may have seen yesterday in the news media, a couple of stations covered this program, but this is really the first time we've been able to discuss it publicly in this type of a forum. What we're going to have is an interactive presentation this afternoon. So I hope if you have with you a mobile device, a cell phone, tablet, or even if you're on a computer, if you want to go ahead and open up another tab or window so that you can participate with this. We're using a system called Poll Everywhere. And the reason we're doing this is really kind of goes to the question that I'm sure is on some people's mind, like why are you updating the city's plan in the middle or the tail end of a pandemic when you can't be together? And frankly, it's because we don't feel like we can wait anymore. Last year, we had planned on doing this public outreach, and this pandemic hit and we couldn't be with people, and we really weren't versed in online meetings and technology and engagement. We hoped that maybe by August we could do it, and then it was maybe by the holidays. And while we were stuck at home not being able to engage with people, at the same time development didn't slow down. In terms of planning applications and what we were seeing in our office, it was the busiest year that we have on our records. In the building department, despite a lockdown, we did not slow down one bit. So growth is not waiting in Idaho Falls for COVID to go away. It's happening now. So we need to have these conversations. So that's why we're engaging now, and we're trying to use as many tools as we can to engage with people. One of the tools we'll use today is called Poll Everywhere. And so what I'd like to do is show you here on this slide how to get logged in, and we'll be asking some questions throughout this presentation. So on your screen, you should see a slide that says how to use Poll Everywhere. There's 3 things I want you to be aware of before I give you the instructions. A lot of the questions are going to be interactive, where you can enter an answer here in this space that says enter a response. Now on these questions, you can enter as many as you want. Enter whatever you want to say, hit submit, and say some more. The second thing you can do is agree or disagree with other people's comments as they pop up. So you'll see a thumbs up for agree, thumbs down for disagree, and you can see how we start to find patterns and similarities in our thoughts and comments. Third is you'll see a slide or a part of the screen that says all cut up or load more responses. As people enter their responses, that will turn yellow, and you can tap on that and see more comments from other individuals that are participating with us today. So let's get you logged in. So if you'll go to pollev.com, you can enter Idaho Falls. You can also go to pollev.com/Idaho Falls. Both of those options will get you there. That's how we recommend you engage. You can see on this screen that you do have the option of texting your answers, although I will tell you that there are a few of these questions that will not work. So we do encourage you to either use your mobile device or your computer to go to pollev.com/Idaho Falls. So while you're getting there, I'm going to switch to the next slide. And if this was too fast, don't worry, because these same instructions are on the top of every question that we'll ask today. So let's start with asking where you live. So you see the instructions on the top of the slide on how to get to the website. And now if you're there and logged in, you should see this map and the options. So go ahead and tell us where you live. So we have somebody that's managed to get in. They live in Area 1. So you'll tap on that and submit. And let's, this is kind of our indicator to see how this is going. And I'll give you just a moment to log in and experiment with this and explain why we're asking this question. Besides the fact it's an easy way to get logged in and just test the system. One of the things we're going to try to do as we go through neighborhood meetings and go through our surveys is we'll be using these geographies to correspond all of the other answers with where people live. So if you live in Area 4, we're going to see what everyone in Area 4 is saying. So it looks like a lot of you are able to get in and tell us where you live. A lot of folks in Area 1, which is great. Your neighborhood meeting is tonight. We hope that you'll join in with us at 6:30 on WebEx or Facebook Live. Looks like we're only missing folks from Area 2. So I'm going to advance the slide and talk a little bit about Imagine If, but you can continue to answer this. This slide will stay live for just a little bit. But thank you for getting logged in and participating with us. So let me tell you a little bit about what Imagine If is. It's no secret, as I already mentioned, that Idaho Falls is growing. And if you look at this slide and see the 2 patterns that we're seeing, and these are long-term patterns. We don't just look at the immediate trends in Idaho Falls. We want to look at long-term history and see what's going on. Our population has grown over time, as is expected, and you know that. But it's continuing to grow at a more rapid rate. If you look at our growth trends historically, we tend to grow at about 1 to 1.5% per year in terms of population. And if you think about this, the principle of compounding interest in finance, it's not any different with population. The bigger our city gets, that 1 to 1.5% starts to look differently than it has in the past. The corresponding pattern that we're noticing is this slide and graph on the right, that how much land each person is taking up is also increasing over the decades.
Quick question, Brad.
Yes.
Is it possible to interact with this poll later after your program?
This particular one will not, but if you attend the neighborhood meetings, those will be available for folks.
Thank
You
you.
bet. So the concern with using up more land per person in our town is the long-term effect of that becomes a problem in terms of the amount of land available, extending utilities to those properties, and the overall cost of maintaining the infrastructure. So we have to think differently about how we grow. We have to think long-term and in terms of cost and all of the effects that the amount of land and how we use that land has on our community. And Idaho Falls is not expected to slow down. Idaho Falls has great infrastructure as we think about Zoom towns and people fleeing the large cities after COVID and trying to find a smaller town to live in. We have a great fiber optic network. that allows people to work from home more conveniently. We have the INL and all of the projects that they have coming up with small modular reactors. And we have access to some of the most beautiful places on Earth. Now add to that we continue to find ourselves in these rankings nationwide, best places to do business and great for job growth, best small cities to move to, top places to live, and most recently named the best performing small city in America by the Milken Institute. So with all of that being said, that doesn't mean that people love growth. When we first announced Imagine If, my favorite Facebook comment was this one, because it probably reflects what a lot of people are thinking. Stop it. Stop the growth. We're too big. And we, in some ways, would love to do that. But people who want to come here are going to come here. And whether they end up in Idaho Falls or Ammon or Iona or in Bonneville County, Idaho Falls' area is a place that people want to live. We can't stop growth, but we can help manage it and make sure that it's done appropriately and that our community stays a great place to live. Now, in our news release yesterday, as I was looking at comments, these are the kind of comments that concern us as a city, as planners. These comments about how expensive it's getting to live here. For years and years, Idaho Falls prided itself on being a great place for low cost of living and great amenities. But as you can see from the kinds of comments we're receiving, that's becoming less and less true. And so we need to think about how we remedy those problems before they get out of hand. So now let's go back to Poll Everywhere and ask you, what do you love about Idaho Falls? As you answer this question, I just want to give you some prompts. One of the things that we're really striving to do in this project is to understand how citizens connect with their community. What is meaningful about Idaho Falls? Why did you come here? Why do you stay here? What is great about Idaho Falls? So you can type in your response and hit submit, and we'll start to see some of those answers pop up on the screen. We want to make sure that as this town grows, that we understand how people connect with Idaho Falls so that we make sure that we preserve as much as we can about the character. So we have our first answer, the Riverwalk. People love the Riverwalk. Great answer, that it's a smaller town. Now that's an interesting problem to put forward, is how do we maintain that small town feel as we continue to grow larger and larger? The clean air, near outdoor adventures. So now you can see people agreeing with the Riverwalk as those rise to the top. We'll spend just another couple of seconds here as you answer. The Rotary Club, of course, friendly people. I love what these answers say about our culture and what it says about our community and why people come here. Small, safe, less crowded, outdoor options. And I do appreciate that some of you recognize that even though the cost of living is going up, that it's still less than a lot of parts of the country. So again, this helps us understand as planners what kinds of things are most important to our citizens. So now let me move on to the next question. And I know some of you are still answering, and I apologize to move forward quickly. But now thinking about growth, what are you concerned will change about Idaho Falls? You've told us what you love. Now, what are you worried about with Idaho Falls as it continues to grow? Think about that small town feel, the cost of living. Are you worried about the outdoor opportunities? Traffic and congestion, certainly one that we hear regularly. The small town feel and friendly people. Traffic, that's going to be a theme, we're sure, as we go through these neighborhood meetings. Outdoors will be overrun. Yeah, I really appreciate all these answers. These are things that we hear as common concerns as we go through public hearings and as we meet with people, we meet with clubs, we meet with organizations. These are very, very, very common. So let's talk for just a minute to keep things moving, and I think you're still able to answer this question. It'll be live for a few more slides. About healthy communities. As we go to our neighborhood meetings and as we go through the Imagine If initiative, there are really three areas of concern from our perspective. Healthy communities, housing, and transportation and connectivity. Now we expect that other things will arise as well, but that's where we want to start. So I want to ask a question, and I know you can't answer because we're not together, but just briefly, do you know what is the biggest predictor of life expectancy in the United States right now? The answer is your zip code. And that begs the question, why? Why does your zip code matter so much? That if I can live in one area of town versus another, that my life expectancy changes by a number of years? Well, imagine if we thought about health in a different light instead of just our physical health. If we looked at the seven dimensions of health and wellness, it's more than just physical. It's spiritual, it's emotional, it's economic and occupational, it's environmental and social. So imagine if we developed with all of these things in mind, that we didn't just design communities that only relied on a car, but also allowed people to get out and walk safely and bike safely to everyday destinations, that there were places for people to gather and connect with each other and build relationships and build community. Imagine if people had easy access to daily goods and services that they didn't have to drive to and didn't have to worry about owning a vehicle and the cost of repairs and insurance. Imagine if they had access to great educational opportunities and lifelong learning. Those are the kinds of things we want to talk about as we think about the future of Idaho Falls, because more and more communities are recognizing that how we develop and how we build and how we grow has an effect on some level of each of these 7 dimensions of health and wellness. So now we're going to post another question. If we think about those 7 dimensions that we just mentioned of health, how healthy do you feel your neighborhood is where you live? Now, as you answer this, you can just tap on one of these emotions. Think about larger than just your block or your couple of blocks where you live. Think about that larger geographic area that we put up on that first map. How healthy do you feel your neighborhood is? Great. So far, most people feel like they live in a pretty healthy place. We see a few more of those answers coming, and we'll give that just another couple of seconds. That's good. I'm glad to see that people feel like their neighborhood is a healthy place to be in that larger scale sense of the word. And we have one that's maybe not so satisfied with where they live in terms of health. So we recently completed a study with a group called Vitruvian Planning out of Boise that looked at 60 different data points as health indicators throughout the city of Idaho Falls. And we did it by a census block group to take a look and see in the city, in terms of zip code, that question back to zip code, where are our potentially, sorry, my throat's really dry, unhealthy areas of town. And you can see on this map, those darker areas, those are where the health indicators were the most concerning. And they range. It's not just health, again, in terms of the physical, but it's things like housing and income and affordability issues and connectivity and access. Those things affect our health. You heard in last week's program, Wyatt Schroeder said in his presentation that housing is health, that if you don't have stable, secure, and healthy housing, so many other things are difficult to achieve. So as we meet with neighborhoods over the next few weeks, we'll show them the data for their individual areas, and you can take a look at where you live on this map and how it varies from place to place across the city. So on that note, that housing is health, let's talk a little bit about housing. Thank you very much. Excuse me. It's no secret, again, that housing prices are rising in Idaho Falls. In fact, in 2017, it was projected that by 2020, our median home price would be $164,000. Well, look at where it is today. That according to Realtor.com and Zillow.com, it's far exceeded that number. $269,900, $278,900. That's a huge jump, even from what was projected and from where we were in 2017. And I just realized I hadn't advanced the slide. So now you can see those numbers. But let's just jump to the next question. I want you to, again, to think about your neighborhood where you live. If I were to ask you today, is your neighborhood an affordable place to live? How would you answer? And we think about affordable. If you think back to that, the data that was presented last week, that are you spending more than 30% of your income on housing costs, would you feel that an average wage earner could live in your neighborhood? So you can see an interesting mix. 70% are saying yes, 30% saying no. Now, again, we'll share data in the neighborhood meetings about what that neighborhood looks like in terms of affordability as best we can. Now we're to a 50-50. Isn't that interesting? That our perceptions change the more we think about it and the more people answer, that there's that real split, that maybe our neighborhoods aren't as affordable as they used to be. Now, one thing that our city's comprehensive plan has said for many years is that our neighborhoods should reflect an economic and social diversity that is indicative of our town. that we should foster inclusiveness and connectivity and mixed housing types, neighborhood connections, all of those things that we just talked about that play into health. We've had a goal for years to make sure that our neighborhoods do that. So again, I'm going to ask you, how well right now do you think your neighborhood reflects that policy goal? Does it reflect the social and economic diversity of Idaho Falls? Is it well connected to places that you want to go? We see people answering generally feel pretty good about that, which is good. Again, that's good. That's a sign that people feel like they live in a healthy community. And we have some that maybe don't quite feel that way, which I think is also good for folks to recognize that. We'll talk a little bit more about that on this next slide, but I'm pleased to see that a lot of folks feel good about where they live, but also leaving some room for improvement. So I have a whole separate presentation on how zoning has created a lot of the issues that we're facing today with housing. I'm not going to go into that, but to summarize as best I can quickly, that a lot of zoning codes and the way they were used over the last century were based in segregation and racism. Keeping suburbs essentially white because those folks had better access to financing and insurance, and making sure those neighborhoods stayed segregated. Now, we don't use that today, obviously. However, the narrative in large part remains the same, in that we have now convinced ourselves, after years of saying that single-family homes and detached homes are the best and anything else is less than the best, we've convinced ourselves that's the only place that people want to live and it's the only thing worth building. And I know I'm exaggerating a bit. I do recognize that. But what towns have done, for the most part, and Idaho Falls is not an exception, is that we've made it fairly simple to build single-family detached homes, and we've made it fairly simple to build apartment complexes. But all of these things in the middle, the townhomes, the bungalows, the smaller apartments, the duplexes, those have a much more difficult path to approval and construction. So we worked with a group called Opticoast Design to look at Idaho Falls and identify the barriers to housing, because one of the solutions to those rising housing costs is on the supply side, supply and demand, a simple economic principle. If we have closed doors inadvertently as the city through zoning laws and policies that make it more difficult to increase the supply, let's try to open those doors. One of the things I love about, I went too far. One of the things I love about this concept is that this is not new to Idaho Falls. Cities built this way for decades, where different housing types were in the same neighborhoods. All of the photos here on this slide are from Idaho Falls. You can see we have bungalow courts and courtyard apartments. We have attached townhomes. We have accessory dwellings, or the mother-in-law flats, as some people call them. We have condos. We have all kinds of things in our town. But part of the conversation we want to have is, how do we increase that choice throughout the city? How do we reduce how do we reduce the idea that only single-family homes can go here and nothing else? And how do we figure out the right way to mix other housing types within new and existing neighborhoods? So let me start with this question. How do you feel about increasing housing choices in your neighborhood? And by housing choices, I mean introducing new types of housing besides that detached home. And maybe you live in an area that already has that mix. I know I do. Living on the west side of Idaho Falls, I live in a neighborhood that has all kinds of housing types in it, and it's fine. So this one's a little bit more mixed, right? Some very negative, some more neutral, some a little bit more positive, and that's fine. Sometimes I think what happens is we have a certain perception of what adding housing choice might mean. So what I'm going to do is go through some more rapid fire questions. I'm going to put some photos up on the screen that you've already seen of these housing types and ask you, where in your neighborhood could these housing types make sense? Because one of the things that we want to ask is, how can each neighborhood in the city be part of the housing solution? To not just say no, but imagine if we said yes to housing in the right places and in the right ways. But imagine if we could do that and increase the supply and help reduce the overall cost of housing and provide affordable places to live in Idaho Falls. So you'll be asked the same question for each housing type. And let's just go to the first one. Think about your neighborhood. Where in your neighborhood does a twin home make sense? And when I say twin home, What I'm talking about is 2 units attached on separate lots. So I can own either side of this unit. Now, part of the reason we're doing this and asking these questions is that right now 91% of our housing stock in Idaho Falls is a detached house. And that's why we're interested in creating ways for developers in the market to bring new and different types of housing to market in Idaho Falls. So yeah, an interesting mix. Some don't feel that they go in the neighborhood at all. Some feel they could go anywhere. Perimeter of the neighborhood seems to be the winner. So let's go to the next one. Where in your neighborhood does a duplex make sense? Now this sounds similar, but this is a different type. This is a unit where this is one building on a single lot, so one owner of this property. Is it just at the perimeter? Is it anywhere? It looks like we have an interesting split. We'll give you just a few more seconds on this one. Now let's ask about accessory dwellings. And I know I'm going fast. That's intentional, just sort of because of time and to get a gut reaction. So anywhere, the perimeter of the neighborhood. It's interesting to us as you're answering this question, how many people will come into our office and maybe they have an older home that has a basement apartment, and it turns out that some zoning law has made that unit illegal. Or even in a new development, folks add a mother-in-law suite, they have a family member that needs to move in, and they find out that that's illegal. And they're shocked that we would prevent that. But that's what an accessory dwelling is. So thinking about that, where in your neighborhood would that be okay? Looks like a lot of you are saying anywhere and a lot in the perimeter. Some folks don't think they belong in the neighborhood. So let's go to the next one. Where in your neighborhood do townhomes make sense? I'm becoming more and more convinced that as long as our housing costs stay the way they are, this is the new starter home. For the first time, probably in my time in Idaho Falls, about a year or so ago, a public hearing was going on for townhomes for sale, and as is expected, a lot of folks showed up in opposition. But for the first time, we had folks showing up in support because they couldn't buy anything else. And they didn't live in the area yet, but they wanted to live in Idaho Falls, and they asked the city council, please approve this so I have a place that I can afford to buy and start myself on that path to ownership and get out of the rental market and start to build that equity in my own property. So these are a very important piece of our housing stock in Idaho Falls, partly also because of financing issues. And I know I'm talking a little longer on this slide, but up to 4 units attached per financing laws are considered a single family home. So it's easier for somebody to purchase a unit like this than it would be a condo in a multiplex development. So as I take a look at the results, perimeter of the neighborhood, anywhere, a few don't want them or don't think they belong, and a few say near and along major streets. So a couple more, we'll go a little bit quicker here. Where in your neighborhood does a bungalow court make sense? So this idea of a number of units pushed really close together and surrounding a common yard that they share. We have anywhere that they don't make sense. And I want to point out that I'm not here to say they make sense in every neighborhood. But they should make sense in some and in the right ways. So this one's a little bit more split, either anywhere or not at all. So let's move to the next one. Now this one again is similar. A neighborhood, where in your neighborhood does a courtyard apartment make sense? Is it anywhere or along major streets, or does it not fit at all? So again, we have kind of that split. And again, I'm going to go just a little bit quicker for sake of time and ask, where in your neighborhood does a mid-rise condo or apartment make sense? So this would maybe be a 2-story unit that might be for sale, might be for rent, would have landscaping and separate parking. Yeah, so it's a little bit more towards the not in my neighborhood, doesn't make sense, or keep it along the major streets. Again, very, very common response. And then finally, let's ask this one. Where in your neighborhood does an apartment complex make sense? So I've used the Falls Apartments here in Snake River Landing, multi-story, maybe a clubhouse, maybe some amenities. Where in your neighborhood does this make sense? And very interesting split. Most folks don't believe they would fit in their neighborhood, but if they do, it seems to be along major streets or the perimeter. So let me ask a more open-ended question. and see what folks think. When you think about adding those housing choices, now, if you didn't think they belong or you're worried about where they go, tell us a little bit about what concerns you with allowing those housing choices in your neighborhood. Is it the people? Is it the property values? Is it the traffic? What is it about adding housing choice that concerns you? Devaluing existing properties. Now, no room already developed. While you're answering, I actually want to talk about that because that is a question, specifically when we think about accessory dwellings. That is a strategy that a lot of communities that are already built out completely add into their stock. Because not only does it provide an affordable place to live, it does allow people who couldn't otherwise afford a home to buy one if they can have that supplemental income. But I mention it as a strategy that other communities use, although it seems like that is one of the bigger concerns, that there's no room. It's already developed. Devaluing existing properties, traffic, the value. So you're seeing some common themes. Traffic and value are showing up a lot. Now, I'm going to ask a little different question. Specifically thinking of those ones that you said do not make sense in your neighborhood. Would they make sense in your mind if there were specific development standards? So maybe that means putting the parking lot behind a building so you don't see a sea of asphalt as you come into a neighborhood. Maybe that means height restrictions. Maybe that means great landscaping and buffering. Whatever that means, are there any types that you feel could make sense if the regulations were correct? So accessory dwellings, great. Courtyard apartments could work, it looks like. Twin homes. Great. So this is actually a theme that we think is interesting. And that goes back to this idea that the perceptions we create in our minds do have an effect on how we think about housing. That if it were done a certain way, maybe it would make sense. So those are the kind of conversations that we want to have in our meetings as we do our outreach, is what then are the things that would help these fit better within your neighborhood? Now, with I think you can continue answering that question for a few minutes. As we move into connectivity and transportation, we want to talk about getting to places we want to go. And so let me ask you this question. Where do you go most often right now? When you leave your house on a daily basis, where do you go? And this will create a word cloud. And this is one where you can enter as many things as you like, as many times as you want. So if you really want work to show up a lot, you can enter work a lot. Brolum's work. And feel free to enter the same things that you're seeing. Answer this question for you. And what should happen is as more people say the same thing, that word will grow in this particular word cloud. So we're starting to see work show up. Those going to school and kids, I can relate. We are the Cramer taxi service for our 4 kids. Yeah, so we go to Ammon, we go to downtown, groceries, or popular one, work, stores, shopping. Now thinking about where you go, here's your next question. Rank your most common mode of transportation. Now this is one where you can slide the options up and down and then hit submit. This might have been a question that we were experimenting with, so you have some preloaded answers. But we expect that personal car will be high on that list. Walking, other. Interesting that walking rises to the top. That's a good thing. Personal car, other. We'll give this one just another moment. One of the reasons we talk about this is, as you'll see on the next slide, is that the ability to walk and bike to a location is important in terms of that healthy community. So in our Connecting Our Communities plan that the city adopted a number of years ago, this statement was listed, that pedestrians and bicyclists are an indicator species of healthy communities. And it's not so much that we want to create things that force people to walk or bike, but what we want to do is develop a community where that's a realistic option to get to daily needs and services, that you don't have to rely on a car if you don't want to or can't afford to. That takes 2 things. It takes places to go and ways to get there. So is it pathways? Is it sidewalks? Is it shared bike lanes? Is it simply allowing development to come close enough to our residences that it's realistic to get there? And we'll talk about a distance that we think about in terms of how convenient should it be. So let me ask you again, lots of questions. If it were more convenient to get to your common destinations by bike or foot, would you? Would you use that method more often? And I think a lot of people would say yes. So far, that seems to be the answer. And then a maybe. You'll see if you take the citywide survey, which I'll invite you to do at the end of this presentation, we have some questions about what would need to improve in our town in order for you to want to make that decision. And we've left weather in there. Weather is a deterrent, and we recognize that it's no fun sometimes to bike or walk in the cold and the snow and the ice. But most of you are saying yes, you would use that more often if you could. So now let's think back to where you live. How would you rate your neighborhood's current level of bike and pedestrian connectivity to daily goods and services? So thinking back to that question, where do I go the most often? How well is your neighborhood designed to get you there on a bike or on foot? So this is one of our more negative responses so far, but certainly with some positive. And I just recognized I have this question in here twice, so we're going to skip that one. And let's hear from you for just a moment. If you were to give us, as a city, your big ideas for how to improve connectivity in your neighborhood, what would you do? What's missing in your neighborhood? What could the city focus on to connect you better on a bike or on foot to the places that you go the most? Change zoning. Okay. Bike paths. This goes back to that idea of safety, right? It may be convenient, but unless it's a safe place to go, we're less likely to use that method of transportation. So bike paths is coming up as a winner. Better transportation, but public transportation, certainly an issue on the city's mind. Safe sidewalks, i.e. Yellowstone, yes, definitely a concern. So again, for sake of time, I'm gonna move ahead to one thing that we want to talk about as a potential solution, and that's this idea of what we call walkable centers. When you think about the convenience of being able to walk or bike to a daily good or services, to get away from that reliance on a car, studies have shown that those services need to be within a quarter to a half mile of your place of residence, and it needs to connect well. You saw a couple of weeks ago in some of P.J. Holmes' slides that when we design with these curvilinear roads that don't connect, that you may have to get in a car and drive around the block for a ways to get to a friend's house instead of being able to connect easily in a short walk. But a walkable center has four main features. It has a mix of uses, so we think about residences, we think about commercial uses, offices, those things that we need on a daily basis. It's pedestrian oriented. Now, that does not mean that cars don't go there. What it means is that the facilities are built for a pedestrian to feel comfortable. That might be a wider sidewalk. It might be separation of the sidewalk from the street. It feels like a comfortable place to be on foot or bike. It has multimodal access, and what we're talking about, it's just as easy to get there on a bike or by foot or by public transportation as it is to drive there. There's plenty of bus stops. There's plenty of places to put your bike when you get there. There's nice, wide, safe paths to get there. And finally, and I think most important to neighborhoods, is that there's house-scale transitions to adjacent neighborhoods. Now, what we mean by that is that we're not talking about putting 4, 5, 6-story buildings next to an existing neighborhood. If an existing neighborhood has single to 2-story houses, then the transition to that walkable center should be consistent with that, so it feels like it belongs. So those are the main features of a walkable center. So we want to ask, does your neighborhood have one? Does your neighborhood have a walkable center where you feel comfortable walking or biking to be able to get to your daily needs? Is there an easily identifiable place in your neighborhood? Now, most people are saying no, and that's kind of what I expected, that people may not feel like they could get there. And nobody said yes, so this question might be moot. So let me actually skip to the next one. If you said no, that your neighborhood does not have a walkable center, where would you imagine one could develop, if any place? Now, as an example, I live on the west side of town, as I mentioned. My walkable center, I would say, is Skyline and Broadway. That's how I would answer this question. Where I know I can go for groceries and restaurants, a haircut, my dentist, the gym, all of those things are within a quarter mile of my door. That is my walkable center. So if you were to think about your neighborhood, where could one go? And it looks like we've stumped you. or you're still thinking about it. But again, as we get into neighborhood meetings, we do want to drill down on this question and understand where is the most logical place. Oh, we got one, Ammon and 49th. Now, I can't do anything about that one because not in Idaho Falls, but I appreciate that thought, right? So we're seeing corner of main intersections, 5th and 65th. They'll have sidewalks, right? Homes and 49th, Boulevard and First. Yeah. I go 6 miles for food. That's a long ways. So give that question some thought, and hopefully as you attend with us in our neighborhood meetings, you can think about that concept. Where would the most logical place for a walkable center to go in your neighborhood? Now, I want to wrap up and leave just a minute or two for question and answer. To share with you what we're doing now and where we're going, so you know how to participate with us. I want to extend some invitations and some calls to action. Right now, we are in the public discussion phase, and we'll do that now through the end of March, and then we'll report on that during the month of April. By the end of April, we plan to have a summary report of all of the public outreach that we're going to do. And that includes the neighborhood meetings that we're doing starting tonight and then over the next 5 weeks. It includes the citywide survey that I'll mention here in a moment, and includes focus groups where we meet with specific groups that may have a particular interest and viewpoint when it comes to growth. Then in spring and summer, we'll draft different plans, policies, concepts of the city, for the city as a whole and for each individual neighborhood. And then in late summer, we'll come back out and do this again. We'll have a public survey, we'll have neighborhood meetings, and we'll at that point ask, what did we get right and what did we get wrong? Where have we missed the boat? Is this going to work for your neighborhood? So as we go throughout this phase, we want to build that database of people who are interested and make sure that everyone is involved so that we can make sure that we're asking the public as much as possible in this strange pandemic world how they want their community to grow. So let me finish with a couple of, again, calls to action. I'd invite you to visit imagineif.city for two projects specifically. One is to take a citywide survey that takes some of these similar concepts but asks them in a different way at a more high and broad level about what you think Idaho Falls is. Now that survey has three goals, three things that we want to do with that survey. One is we want to make sure that we reach a very broad audience. And so that survey it's not quite available yet in Spanish, but by the end of this week, we're expecting to have a Spanish version as well as an English version. We want to make sure that we reach as many people in our community as we can. The second goal is to understand on our side what connects you with Idaho Falls. What do you love about being here? What do you remember about Idaho Falls? What are you worried about? And what makes this place meaningful to you? And then third, we want to understand your preferences and priorities when it comes to things like housing, transportation, and city amenities. What do you want the city to focus on over the coming years as we continue to grow? So that's the first thing. Please take a moment to go to imagineif.city, and you'll find a link to that survey. And feel free to share that link with your various networks. We would love to hear from as many people as possible, whether or not they live exactly in city limits or if they come here for work or business. Please share this survey as broadly and as widely as you can. The second thing you'll see on that website is the schedule for neighborhood meetings, and the day of the meeting, we'll post the link so you can join us via WebEx. You can also request a calendar invite by emailing imagineif@idahofallsidaho.gov. You can also watch on Facebook Live and comment there. We will help anybody who wants to participate to be able to do so. Those meetings will be held if you want to come in person, to come to the City Hall Annex. So again, tonight, if you're in Area 1, come join us tonight at 6:30. So I said two things on the website. There's really three. That third thing is a project we have not announced publicly yet, but it's live and ready for you to participate if you'd like. It's back to this idea that we want to understand your connection to Idaho Falls. We have partnered with a group called Vid Day, and we have an opportunity for you to post video memories for us and share photos about Idaho Falls that help us understand what is most meaningful to you. So you can click on that link on our website, and you'll see 6 different prompts for you to be able to record a 1-minute video for each of those prompts. So, for example, we have what are some memorable places to you? Why did your family come here to Idaho Falls, and what were your first impressions? Where did you go to school, and what are your great memories about going to school in Idaho Falls? And then that sixth prompt is not about the past, but it's about the future. We'll ask you to tell us in a minute or so, what are your big ideas for Idaho Falls as we continue to grow and move into the future? Think about 30 years from now, and you're looking down on the city. What do you want to see? And so we're really excited about that. The Museum of Idaho has helped us craft some of those prompts. We're very grateful for their help. We think this is a really unique opportunity to capture that real character of Idaho Falls and what it means to people. So with that, if there's any time, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'm actually going to check my phone as they're being texted to me. So I have a question here. What could help the city with these neighborhood talks? How can the Rotary help? Boy, I can't read. How can the Rotary Club help? I think the main thing right now is get the word out. That's always the challenge. No matter how much outreach we try to do on our own, we will always hear feedback that we didn't do enough, that we didn't take this avenue or that avenue. So if you can help us get the word out and get people to come and engage with us, that is the biggest thing that you can do. Contact your networks, share that link, share that survey, and help us get people here, because now is the time to talk with us. What generally happens is there's not that sense of urgency until the development's ready to break ground, and that's when people show up and engage with us. But by then it's not quite too late, but it's getting awfully close. So right now is the time to come and talk. So if you could help us get the word out, that is great. So, sorry, I'm trying to hold too many things here. How does the city balance all the interests among developers, citizens, and businesses? That is the trick. I think first thing we try to do is seek to understand all of them. What are their interests and what are their commonalities? And if we can focus on their common interests, that's the best starting point in our minds. Now, we're not here to make people money, and we're not here to protect necessarily specific interests. We're here to find that balance. And so in my mind, we start with the conversation and look for the common interests and do our best. Now we're not going to make everybody happy, and we recognize that. But if we can take as broad of approach as possible and understand from as many people as we can, we feel that helps us craft policies and programs that meet all of those interests. So it looks like we have one more. How do people outside the city have a voice in what happens in Idaho Falls? And I'm going to take a little bit of liberty in what that question is asking, is why do we care about that opinion? Or maybe I'm misinterpreting that, but how do they have a voice? This is public, a public process. And the reason that we care about what folks even outside of city limits think is we recognize Idaho Falls' role as sort of that regional center, the largest city in the region, a lot of draw for employment and shopping and housing. And even if you don't live in Idaho Falls, you're probably coming here for something. Maybe it's medical care, maybe it's shopping, but it's something. And so it's important for us to coordinate with our neighboring jurisdictions, Ammon and the county, Iona, those other cities. We need to know what they're doing, what their interests are, and we feel like they need to know what we're doing, what our interests are, so we can work together. So we would open these doors to anybody. Certainly anybody can take the survey. In the neighborhood meeting, we don't have a specific one for outside city limits. If somebody wants to attend, we're not going to turn anybody away. But we want as much input as we can. How do we minimize sprawl? Great question. So again, back to that presentation that I didn't give about zoning. Zoning has been one of the problems when it comes to sprawl. When we require minimum lot sizes and we require lots of parking, you just naturally have to use up more land in order to make that happen. So those are the kinds of things we can think about from a regulation standpoint. But then we do also have to think differently about our growth. The single-family detached home, those kinds of developments take up the most amount of land overall. When you think about a dwelling units per acre type calculation, and I know I'm getting jargony here, but when you think about how much land those take up for one unit compared to how many units of housing you could put if you went vertical and had more housing on a smaller space, you become much more efficient. And one of the things that does that's beneficial to the city to think differently, to have more condensed development, is you're using existing infrastructure, existing roads and utilities, so that you don't have those costs to maintain for the next 100 years and really forever. You can reduce those lane miles and miles of sewer and water. So it's not just about land efficiency. It's about keeping our city's budgets manageable and our maintenance levels reasonable. Will Idaho Falls work with builders to help fund the schools when they build neighborhoods, also to put in parks and green space? Excellent question, and I hope I've not skipped any. You'll have to wave at me if I have. So how do we work with builders? So a lot of communities do that through what are called impact fees. And that's the idea that if you come into a community and you're bringing housing and you're bringing business, that you're having an impact on our infrastructure that our citizens wouldn't be paying for if you weren't coming to our community. So we do that in a way by asking developers to build roads. The traffic's going to increase, and so your development needs to pay its share for that. Now, when it comes to parks and schools, we don't have the budget that deals with schools, but the state law does talk about impact fees in schools, and that is a tool that could be used, although the law needs to change a bit in order to do that. But the city is at least having a conversation about impact fees as a development comes into town. What is its impact on our parks as it introduces more people that will use those facilities? We can talk about impacts to the pathway system. We make people build roads. Developers build roads when they build a development, but we don't require them to build any other type of pathway or connection, as we talked about. So those are, excuse me, that's probably the most common way is through impact fees. We keep hearing about a huge temporary housing need coming. Comments on how this will impact long-term growth. So the temporary housing is an interesting conversation, and I wish that I had the answers. But in a lot of what I have seen, I'm not sure we'll end up within city limits, at least certain types of the temporary housing. But it also does speak to the need to provide supply, because as those folks come in and take up the units that are available, if they are going to be here long term, it just continues to push that conversation about supply and demand in a negative direction. So supply is important, which is why we're trying to open those doors and say yes to housing instead of no. There was a second part to that question. And how does it impact the long-term growth? I think some of that, it remains to be seen in terms of if you have all these folks show up and then they all leave, and now you have a glut of units. That is a concern that I'm starting to hear from developers, is they're worried about the units being absorbed. And then it says, final question, what city do you love? Have the quality of life and diversity, a model for Idaho Falls. Wow, that's a really interesting question. And it might take me a couple minutes to answer it. I don't know that I have a great answer. I love Idaho Falls. Actually, I love where I live. I grew up on the east side of Idaho Falls. I currently live on the west side of Idaho Falls. And one of the reasons we stay where we are is because of the convenience that it offers. I can easily walk or bike to work. My kids can walk over to the grocery store and a convenience store. They can walk to elementary, junior high, and high school. It's a great place for convenience. Trying to think of another model. Because I said I travel a lot, didn't I? Let me give that some more thought. Maybe I can respond in a Facebook comment afterwards. But really thought-provoking question. I appreciate it. And I do appreciate your participation in Poll Everywhere and for engaging with us. Again, I invite you to take that survey, imagineif.city, and look forward to your engagement as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brad. That was an excellent presentation. Heard a lot of comments on the chat about how people loved the format with the questions and being able to respond. Thank you for providing such a wonderful interactive experience. And Rotarians, please go on, fill out the survey. Please accept those calls to action that Brad offered to us so we can help the city and have some input on our growth and the future of our neighborhoods. Quick reminder again, next week we will be having a Zoom call where we will welcome our district governor, Ben Nelson, to present to our club. We wish you all a good week and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thank you.